Read Torah this morning, so we thank Debbie and Andy. Evie?
Yeah.
We don't call it Evie. Evie, because it's Evelyn.
Right.
So Evie and Naomi, we thank them all for reading Torah so beautifully this morning. So you've heard of the phrase, of course, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I, of course, don't believe that. Being a rabbi and seeing lots of people go through very difficult times in their lives, sometimes that which doesn't kill you does sometimes leave you broken. And it doesn't necessarily leave you stronger. There are people, and there have been so many studies done on this that it's been shown to be actually inconclusive. There aren't some people who are just luckily resilient, some people who just aren't. There are studies that suggest that there are people who are raised a certain way, which will breed resiliency, and then there are people who just have it. And it means the opposite as well, and that is there are some people who are raised in a very tough environment, one in which they have learned resiliency, but then can also arrive at a moment in their life in which they're broken. And so this thought about how can we raise a more resilient generation, or this thought about how we can raise a more resilient people, is one that we all struggle with, because if there was a path, a singular route towards resiliency, then of course we would raise our children that way. What I find interesting is if you ask parents what they want most for their children, they'll say two things: health and happiness. Our tradition has never taught you should know happiness. We've taught to teach our children health and resiliency. Happiness seems to be a luxury for some people in our society, not necessarily all people. And so the idea of being able to rise up from the difficult times, as we might say as a post-Holocaust generation, to rise up from the ashes, requires a certain resiliency. And I think that there's something that we see in this morning's Parashat that teaches this quite beautifully. So focus, for example, on this one verse that I share with you. And I want you to think of the background that leads up to this one pasuk. And that is the idea that Moses has gone through a tremendous amount of challenge in his life. From his earliest days, when he is sent down a river wondering what will happen to him, to being raised in the house of a Pharaoh in which he probably felt like an outsider no matter what, becoming the leader of the Jewish people, and the challenge of what it meant to stand between God's short fuse and the Jewish people's, I guess, short attention span. To bring them out of Egypt and to feel no sense of appreciation for everything that he does for the Jewish people. And then last week's Parsha, the Korach rebellion, a personal attack on Moses, not on his nature of leadership, not on his ability to appoint leaders and judges, but personally they attack him and say he thinks he's better than the rest of us. And after that occurs, we have here in this week's Parsha the death of Aaron, the death of Miriam, which has to, of course, recall for Moses the death of his two nephews, Nadav and Avihu. This is not a person who has skated by life without any challenges. This is a man who over time has seen one difficult and traumatic moment after the next. And so this week's Parsha offers us a glimpse into the resiliency of Moses. And he ultimately, in this week's Parsha, ends up hitting a rock, lets out his frustration, is punished for that. He'll never go into the land of Israel. And yet he leads with a clarity born of resilience. And so here we have this first pasuk. Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that has befallen us. But Edom, the king of Edom, said to him, you shall not pass through me, lest I come out against you with the sword. Thus Edom refused to allow Israel to pass through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. This is a moment in Moses' leadership, in which he is, as we'll see through the varied commentaries, seeking reconciliation with the king of Edom. He's doing his very best to negotiate a deal so that he can bring the Jewish people on the shorter route to the land of Israel. He doesn't want anything from Edom. He doesn't plan, as we'll see through the commentaries, to pillage the land. He doesn't plan on waging war on the Edomites. He just wants to go through their land on their way to the holy promised land. It's all he wants. And so we see this through Rashi, through Sforno, Ramban, the Midrash, and of course Targum Yonatan, an Aramaic translation of the text. Rashi says, "Thus says your brother Israel." Rashi emphasizes the word achicha. Why does Moses say or send a message through a messenger to say your brother? Now, we know that Edom are not brothers of the land of Israel, but we do share, unfortunately use this word, a brotherhood with other nations. We are friendly with other nations. And so Rashi emphasizes that point by saying he pleads with Edom not on aggressive terms, not on animosity, not in terms of animosity, but in terms of collegiality. Look, you're a king, I'm Moses, right? Let's get along, right? Let's try our very best to work out a deal so that nobody is hurt. And then Sforno says, we will go by the king's road. Israel offered to avoid even drinking the water of Edom. He says, we're not here to do anything harmful to you. What we want is just to walk through. It might work out for all of us, right? You might have some people in your town who'd like to sell some wares. Maybe we could engage in some globalization. Maybe we could have some trade together. We're not going to take anything from you. We're not going to leave you left with nothing. Says Sforno. Rambam says Israel did not just request passage. They sought reconciliation. Right? The Ramban says they're just looking to get along. Right? Maybe we can establish some sort of relationship. Midrash says, because you did not fight against Edom, though you had the power, I will one day repay your kindness. The Midrash says, because Moses in the end heard King Edom and said, you know what, we could take you on this. We're stronger than you are. We're a military force that you don't want to engage with. But he sought, in fact, a peaceful resolution, and when it didn't come, he didn't engage in conflict. I think what's really interesting is if we look at all of these in the language of reconciliation, and if we look at them in the language of resiliency, we see some very important messages. First is Rashi's message, and that is, in the face of difficulty and challenge, seek out your family. Don't try and go it alone. He uses a language, says Rashi, he emphasizes the language of brotherhood because what he's suggesting is when things don't go your way, lean on your family. Lean on the people closest to you. Don't feel as though you have to go it alone. Sforno adds something even more beautiful to the language of resiliency. He says, take the moral high ground. Be ethical. Regardless of how things are going for you, that doesn't give you permission to act in a way that's unethical. It means that you can rely on your system of values and morals and commitments. And when you do that, you'll find an inner reserve that strengthens you. Ramban says, seek out peace. Resiliency comes from a sense of shlemut, of shalom, of peace and wholeness. And when you can find that inner peace within yourself, then you'll see that the conflicts from the world around you can melt away. They don't have to consume you, and they don't have to bring you down. And then Midrash Tanhuma says, when all else goes wrong, find someone to be kind to. When all else is bothering you and taking you out of your comfort zone, then you know what you need to do? You need to find someone to be kind to. I've taught this very often. And that is, when you see yourself drowning, when you feel yourself going down, the best thing to do is to look for somebody else who needs help. The message of resiliency is a message that we learn both nationally and personally. We find ourselves in this strange circular sort of thinking, and that is, we come from an incredibly resilient people. And we do that because we are incredibly resilient individuals. And because we're resilient individuals, we in turn become a resilient people. And so the cycle begins. The Torah teaches us how to do it. And if we internalize the messages of Torah, of teaching and of learning this specific text and Torah in general, then we find we can elevate ourselves to a higher spiritual purpose. And it begins with a sense of we will continue on, regardless of the circumstances that surround our lives. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page